On the 20th of January this year, a number of us initiated a debate on lawfare by oligarchs and undemocratic states who seek to suppress free speech and the scrutiny of their activity. The Department of Justice took the question up and has promised new legislation, and I'm very glad to see the new minister there about to lose his departmental virginity in this debate. It won't hurt, I'll be gentle with him. Today, I want to speak about another outrageous case of lawfare. It centres around the former Kazakh president, Nursultan Nazarbayev. Nazarbayev was the autocratic ruler of Kazakhstan for 3 decades. His time in office was characterised by repression, torture and other human rights abuses. Nazarbayev was ousted from power in 2019 but remained a significant influence in the country. He was more or less able to anoint his own successor as president and met with Vladimir Putin even after leaving office. During his 29-year rule, Nazarbayev won elections with claimed results of over 90% of votes cast, and the capital city was even renamed after him in 2019. The term rigged dictatorship comes to mind. As long ago as 1999, the Western press aired concerns about assets held by Nazarbayev and his associates. The New Yorker reported that year that Swiss officials had found a bank account worth $85 million that was intended for the Kazakh treasury, but in fact was held by Nazarbayev, $85 million. But that turns out to be just small change. 3 years later, Nazarbayev's critics in Kazakhstan accused him of hiding $1 billion in oil revenue in offshore accounts. Now, the Nazarbayev Fund, an ostensibly charitable organisation, and a related firm, Adjournment Technologies Limited, have between them started a lawfare campaign against 4 news bodies, including 3 based in Britain. These 3 are the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, the Daily Telegraph and Open Democracy. The supposed provocation for this action was the news body's reports on Nazarbayev and his associates, reports that revealed several ambiguities and a lack of transparency around Nazarbayev's charitable foundations. First, the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the non-profit investigative news platform, published an investigation into charitable foundations set up during Nazarbayev's rule. It revealed that companies connected to these charitable foundations and Nazarbayev's relatives had received bailout and loan funding from his government. One such case involves the St. Regis Astana, a hotel in the Kazakh capital that opened in 2017. The company that owns the hotel, the Turian Investment Group, has included amongst its shareholders Nazarbayev's daughter and his son-in-law. The hotel project was built with the help of a loan of $85 million from a state-owned development bank, which even the current president, Tokayev, has conceded has become, and I quote, the personal bank of a select group of people representing financial, industrial and construction groups. Remember, this is supposedly a state bank. By the early 2000s, Nazarbayev's Presidential Affairs Department joined 2 Kazakh firms in developing a resort on the Turkish coast, where Nazarbayev reportedly spends his own holidays. One of the private firms involved was owned by 3 businessmen who had previously handed cash to Nazarbayev's university fund. In another instance, 2 of Nazarbayev's foundations owned a landscaping business that received $6.5 million in government contracts between 2012 and 2018. After these revelations, Open Democracy covered the story, asking the simple question of whether an autocrat's riches were being allowed into this country without due scrutiny. They were talking about Adjournment Technologies, a firm incorporated in the UK which has nearly $8 billion in gross assets. Yet in 2020 it had 1 member of staff in the United Kingdom. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism and the Daily Telegraph then collaborated to investigate Adjournment Technologies. It appeared that Adjournment Tech's registered office at the time was a brass plate address shared with hundreds of other firms. The assets of Adjournment Technologies have been held in several sectors, including in banking, telecoms, retail and several countries from Luxembourg to the UK to Kazakhstan itself. It was until recently controlled by 3 organisations, including the Nazarbayev Fund, via an intermediary organisation. The Nazarbayev Fund itself is allegedly run for the benefit of educational institutions in Kazakhstan and stipulates in its charter that Nazarbayev cannot benefit personally from the fund. Yet he remains the chairman of its executive body and has the power to change the fund's rules. And why a fund ostensibly for education and the benefit of the Kazakh population needs assets in banking or retail is not clear. The fund is also connected to other senior Kazakh politicians. Nazarbayev's former Deputy Prime Minister, Yerbal Orenbayev, was a director of Uzantech and owned 4.6% of the company. Moreover, the investigation shows that First Heartland Usan Bank, the largest asset owned by Usan Technologies, has received more than $2 billion in bailouts from the Kazakh government. Now, this is a company that's paid out $430 million in shareholder dividends in recent years. An oligarch married to one of the Nazarbayev's relatives owns 20% of the bank. It appears to be steeped in Nazarbayev's influence. While Usan Technologies itself has now changed its ownership structure shortly before the reports were published, the new structure is, if anything, more opaque. The new owner is a non-profit-based organisation in Nevada, a jurisdiction whose secrecy laws have been criticised in the past, including in respect to the Pandora Papers. That non-profit is owned by another non-profit, whose president is the chief executive of the Nazarbayev Fund, as well as Nazarbayev's former education minister. Now, frankly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you are confused by this extraordinary cat's cradle of different organisations and interlocking organisations, you would not be alone. It is designed to be confusing. It is designed to be difficult to understand and opaque. And creating organisations of this level of opacity and complexity is not easy, and is always done, however, for a reason. In this case, the most likely reason is to conceal the extent of Nazarbayev's control of this web of assets and wealth. Now, to come back to the point of lawfare, all the news outlets did was ask legitimate questions and try to shine a light on some apparent irregularities and the opaque nature of Nazarbayev's foundations. They did not even make any allegations of impropriety or money laundering in the articles for which they're being attacked. And yet they're now facing potential legal censure. The Bureau and the Daily Telegraph alone have received 3 threatening legal letters in 4 months, telling them to retract their claims and apologise, and a case has now been filed in the High Court. Yes, I'll give way, yes.
It's grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I noticed that these cases had been filed, though not yet served, and tabled a written question in this place about their effect on media freedom. I have to tell the House and the Right Honourable Gentleman, I was then contacted by lawyers for the company asking me to withdraw that question. I wonder if he would have, what response he would have to them asking me to withdraw a perfectly innocent parliamentary question.
See, they clearly don't understand parliamentary privilege. Secondly, what they're doing, as I'll come back to in a second, is trying to repress free speech and transparency in this country. This is a clear case of an ultra-wealthy individual using British legal system to try and scare his critics into silence. And what the Honourable Gentleman refers to is, of course, them trying to extend that to his actions, proper actions, in this House. In a second, I'll come back to it. And the work of those who have been targeted is all the more important, considering that Nazarbayev has himself had a law passed in Kazakhstan preventing him being prosecuted there. So what he's doing with this lawfare is trying to extend that protection to this country, which is, frankly, an outrage. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I also congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Halton, Price and Howden for bringing this forward. Does the Right Honourable Member not agree that we can never be in a position where the fear of personal cost of litigation prevents truth from being revealed by journalists who are putting their homes and their livelihood on the line to highlight individuals who will in retaliation sue them until they have not a penny to spare, and that rather than simply saying this is awful, as we all are, what we really need is government to prevent and to this House legislation to prevent it.
I'll come back to that very point in a moment, but as the Honourable Gentleman implies, defending oneself against a libel claim, especially by an oligarch or other wealthy person, is often cripplingly expensive. In fact, it's typically cripplingly expensive. The risk is not losing the case, which is improbable in most of these cases. The penalty for exponents of free speech is the sheer cost of a vexatious process, which is what Nazarbayev wants in this case. I will, of course, give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member, and I want to thank him and congratulate him on securing this debate and on a fantastic speech. He's been a passionate and effective campaigner on the growing problem of egregious slap cases, arguing the urgent need for action to stop these abusive lawsuits, along with the Honourable Member for the Isle of Wight as well. I want to raise the case of Dmitry Leus, a UK resident of Russian Turkmen origin, who is threatening libel action against Chatham House because of his inclusion in their excellent report, The UK's Kleptocracy Problem. Leus was a Russian banker convicted of money laundering in Russia in 2004, who arrived in the UK on a Cypriot passport. He has donated to the Conservative Party and chaired his local Conservative association. He tried to donate £500,000 to the foundation of the then Prince Charles, but the donation was spurned when the charity learnt of his conviction. In July, my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Hodge Hill, said in this House that Leus is absolutely dependent on the Russian security services, who my right honourable friend...
Intervention.
I think...
No,
yes, okay.
It's an intervention. I'm sorry, you have to be brief.
Since coming to Britain, Leus has tried to make us believe that his conviction was overturned, but this is untrue. It was struck off the record so that he could engage in business. I'll be very brief, if I may. After 7 months of increasing demands and due to the costs of defending the case, estimated at some £500,000 before trial, Chatham House has been forced to agree to his meritless claims and excise the report of all mentions of Mr. Leus. Does the Right Honourable Member agree with me that this case appears to be yet another example of a powerful, wealthy Russian abusing the British legal system through lawfare to muzzle important research in the public interest?
Yeah. I thank the Honourable Lady for drawing
that.
That
was extraordinarily generous there. David
I thank the Honourable Lady, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for drawing the attention of the House to the case. I mean, I don't know the substance of it, but the fact of the matter is these cases are best resolved transparently and in public with fearless reporting, not with repression of free speech. And oligarchs will often bring these claims because they know their opponents, as in this case, will have to back down, either through the threat of bankruptcy or that because they become bankrupt as a result of the operation. So it's a good example of this problem, which is why the government earlier this year found that some journalists no longer publish information on certain individuals or topics. I mean, here we have a case in point, such as exposing serious wrongdoing or corruption because of the potential legal costs. The government said some journalists, but it's also some newspapers and some organisations whose job it is to expose this sort of information. Now, with every letter and every stage of legal action, organisations like the Bureau of Investigative Journalism must divert legal resources and attention away from public interest reporting and towards defending themselves against bogus and trivial claims. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism is a small team with just a few dozen staff. To defend itself, it's been forced to divert much of its reporting team and senior management, as well as significant financial resources, to dealing with these legal threats. This kind of lawfare is a potentially existential threat to investigative journalism. And that's precisely what the claimants in these cases intend. These proceedings are not initiated in order to prove the organisations wrong. The oligarchs know the organisations are right, but rather to financially and psychologically exhaust them into retraction. What Nazarbayev wants is to import into the UK contempt for free speech shown in Kazakhstan through his 3-decade rule. The point the Honourable Member for Chester was making when he intervened on me. He's bringing to Britain what he imposed on Kazakhstan, and we cannot allow that. This should offend the sensibilities of anyone who values a fair and equal justice system, as well as those who rightly appreciate the value of public interest reporting. It's a some reassurance that the government intends to reform the law around slaps, as these are known. But we must move more quickly, and I say this directly to the Minister. The Minister is an old friend of mine over the years, and I'm very pleased that he's actually in his place and in the department. I think he'll do a fantastic job. But I say to him, we must move more quickly. There's no time to waste when even now we have oligarchs making use of slaps to curb free speech and evade justice in our country. One of our ex-colleagues, Charlotte Leslie, is facing just such a case at the moment. As members of Parliament, we have parliamentary privilege and can speak without the threat of liable action. But that privilege brings with it a duty to speak up for those who cannot speak for fear of punishment by the likes of Nazarbayev. In the wake of the war in Ukraine, the government swiftly introduced sanctions on those who linked to the Russian regime, making it harder for them to use our country as a money laundering venue. It's high time we applied the same urgency and purpose to addressing the damage that oligarchs are doing to our justice system and our free speech values. For too long, we have facilitated oligarchs' dirty money and corruption in the UK. Does the Honourable Gentleman want to give it?
I'd love to intervene there, if I may. I mean, I think he's making an incredibly important... it's a great speech, and I think he's making incredibly good points about lawfare. My concern is that we've got the economic crime bill, and it would be wonderful if the Minister, when he's on his feet in a few minutes' time, could confirm that lawfare is going to be part of that, because we've had a lawfare bill written, ready to go, and they could adopt it. And there are three elements to the lawfare. There's the abuse of privacy laws, there are various other factors, and then what we're reading about here, which is the aggressive abuse of libel law. And the problem is, whether we like it or not, we make speeches, grandiose speeches, like free speech must be defended. The fact is, it's being attacked all the time. In the last few years, it has been relentlessly attacked by criminals, by oligarchs, and by Russian proxies and other corrupt proxies in this country. And we need these laws brought in now, not sometime in the future.
And he makes the point exactly right, because our friends and neighbours in the US and in Europe are taking action, and we must not be left behind. If we do not act, we'll let dangerous people off the hook while allowing journalists and researchers to be punished for doing their jobs. What we now need is a commitment from ministers to bring forward either a freestanding slaps bill or a component of another bill. I don't really care which. One second. I don't really care which. It just needs to happen very soon. Briefly, I've only got seconds.
He's making an excellent speech, an excellent case for having anti-slap legislation, either as part of the economic crime bill or standalone, and that needs to happen. But this also seems to be part of a general issue on costs. Costs are being used as a weapon in economic crime, in slaps, and in many other areas of law. It was an issue in Leveson as well. Don't we need to look at that and ensure that the courts can do their job unfettered with these outside influences, which are causing what is the best legal system in the world to come into disrepute?
I mean, he's exactly right. I mean, there are a variety of other mechanisms we can use. I mean, we can give the judges the right to strike down egregious cases early. We could look at even the prospect of providing legal aid for journalists who are pursuing what are bona fide public interest issues. There are a variety of issues. We should address all of them. We are the global home of justice, this country is. Our justice system is admired around the world. And if we are not careful, it will be corrupted, undermined, manipulated and abused by slaps and people using slaps. And I'm asking the department, asking this minister to take action, or tell us that the department's going to take action, because Brits are rightly proud that our legal system is a model for the world. And if we are to ensure that that remains the case, we must act, and act soon.
I'd like to welcome the Minister to his new position, Gareth Johnson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I first of all congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Houghton, Price and Howden for securing this debate. It's true that I was his PPS back in 2017 when we were going through the turbulent times of Brexit. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think he and I are so pleased that things are so much calmer now. I also want to pay tribute to all the members that have contributed so far. The member for City of Chester, the Right Honourable Member for Barking, member for Strangford and Hammersmith and Fulham, and of course another doughty fighter on this issue, the Honourable Member for the Isle of Wight. I think the House is lucky to have the members in this chamber right now who have seen this as an issue that they want to take forward, and they want to ensure that correct things are carried out by my department. And it also gives me the opportunity to restate the government's commitment to freedom of speech and the protection of journalists. Slaps are wrong. They are a form of bullying, and they need to be stopped, and stopped through legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker. First, let me emphasise that investigative journalism is of central importance to a functioning democracy. The UK launched a national action plan in 2021 to ensure that we continue to foster an environment in which journalists feel safe from physical harm and intimidation, and where those who threaten them are properly held to account. Yes, I will be well.
The latest case, as eloquently highlighted by the Honourable Member for Barking, is just the latest example of the threatening abuse of lawfare, this time against Chatham House. Remarkable that effectively these robust, incredibly famous international organisations are filleting reports because of the intimidation paid for by multimillionaires. Can the government, can the Minister state to us the SLAPS law, so the data prevention, or the abuse of data protection, the abuse of privacy, the abuse of libel, is this going to be dealt with in a law which the Honourable Member for Esher and Walton was planning, or is it going to be part of the Economic and Crime Bill, which is happening very soon, and which could be amendments as part of that bill?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for the Isle of Wight for his intervention. This matter will be dealt with by legislation. I cannot promise him that it will be dealt with the Economic Crime Bill, but it will be dealt with through legislation. And I hope the House will forgive me if I don't refer to the substance of the cases that have been raised in this debate today. But I do want to set out exactly what the government intends to do on this, because our aim is to ensure that journalists operating in the UK are as safe as possible, reducing the number of attacks on and threats issued to journalists, and ensuring those that are responsible are brought to justice. Yes, of course.
We all agree that the legislation is necessary. The problem is that if the Minister doesn't take advantage of the legislation that is before us, which is the Economic Crime Bill, yes, I tell you, he'll be arguing behind the scenes on getting time for legislation for years and years and years. The opportunity is there, the need is there. Please grasp that opportunity and put it down as amendments to the existing bill before the House.
I hear what the Honourable Lady is saying. I cannot give her that commitment that we will place it within the Economic Crime Bill. There are two schools of thought as to whether it can be placed into another piece of legislation and thereby limited by the long title of that bill, or whether it's better off dealt with in isolation on its own, so it has more of a free rein. I can inform the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, and the House that the legislation is still at this stage being drafted, and as a consequence it's not oven ready, if you like, to go straight into another piece of legislation that's before the House right now. Well, I will, but I want to get through all of this, so I'm very briefly.
I'd just like to save the government from a possible pitfall. Does he not realise that the likelihood is that people present in this chamber tonight will put down amendments to the bill, and then the government would be in the invidious position of having to vote against them, even if it agreed with them? So let's avoid that by getting it into the bill in the first place.
I hope, and I hope it's not a naive hope, that honourable members on both sides of the House will work with the Ministry of Justice over this, because we do intend to legislate on this issue.
Of course, we don't want to get in the way of the Department of Ministry of Justice, but the key issue is speed. The key issue is speed. If you can turn around to us, not necessarily today, I know there are cabinet committees that need to deal with this, we're all familiar with that, but if you can turn around to us at some point in the near future and say, yes, we're going to do it in this session, yes, we're going to do it soon, then he'll find the Economic Crime Bill makes much easier progress than otherwise.
I can give an assurance that we will do this as soon as the legislation is ready and as soon as parliamentary time allows that to happen. I'll look away one last way, because I want to, I hope honourable members want to hear what I've got to say.
You absolutely want to hear what the Minister's got to say. Just on the oven-ready point, and I know it's a slightly overused term in this House, We had a bill written. There is a bill. There is a SLAPS bill, which is oven ready.
Well, I'm sure that the parliamentary draftsman will be interested in having a careful look at that. We need to get legislation right. If we do not get legislation right, and I know this is not the intention of the Right Honourable Member for Houghton, Brighton, Howden, but if we do not get this legislation right, Mr Deputy Speaker, then we run the danger of blocking perfectly legitimate action that's being taken against wrongdoers. And so therefore we need to get it right. In other jurisdictions where the legislation has been brought in at haste and got wrong, it's needed to be withdrawn and amended. That is not something that we want to repeat in the UK. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, the UK may not face the same challenges as other states, but it is clear that journalists operating here still face threats to their personal safety, largely through online abuse. We rely on journalists to hold powerful people and organisations to account for our collective good. Lawfare that targets our public watchdogs through aggressive, intimidatory tactics must be stamped out. Russia's shocking invasion of Ukraine brought home the urgency of government action on strategic lawsuits against public participation, SLAPS, as lawfare is commonly called, amidst reports that hostile states could finance litigation in the UK to obstruct worthwhile investigations into corruption and other wrongdoing. We know that the government's decisive action on sanctions has already urged firms to review their Russian client list, mitigating threats to national security. Insurers are increasingly cautious in granting professional indemnity insurance, reflecting greater scrutiny of Russian-linked litigation. As this House will recall, the government published a call for evidence on SLAPS on the 17th of March and its accompanying response to the call of evidence on SLAPS on the 20th of July. I wish to thank the 120 respondents to our call for evidence who submitted evidence of the highest quality. We individually analysed each response to inform our proposals and were particularly troubled to hear the shocking impact these cases can have on individuals' well-being and livelihood. We must all be grateful to investigative journalists who report under immense financial and psychological pressure so that we, as a collective, are well informed. The call for evidence findings have persuaded us of the need to act, though recent court cases show that the issue requires caution as SLAPS are difficult to identify. SLAPS present a novel challenge to free speech, so we want to be sure before introducing legislation that we get this right so that we deliver the outcome we all want to see. I want to see legislation to tackle SLAPS. The Lord Chancellor wants to see legislation to tackle SLAPS. I know the government wants to see that, and that's why we intend to bring in legislation, but we have got to get it right, because there is a notable difference in legal and judicial opinion on what constitutes a SLAP, both domestically and overseas. To rectify this, we have committed to primary legislation to enable clearer identification of SLAPs according to common characteristics rather than a fixed definition. These characteristics may include aggressive pre-action communications and targeting individuals where their publishers would be more appropriate. Today, we know that defendants are intimidated by the prospect of years of litigation that require expensive legal defence. We would introduce an early dismissal process in statute which will effectively stop complainants from financially and psychologically exhausting their opponents via abusive means, cutting short cases which have no merit, potentially via a three-part test. The crippling costs as well currently borne by SLAPS defendants will be addressed through a new cost protection scheme which will ensure that journalists and free speech advocates are able to litigate without fear of bankruptcy. This scheme will be introduced in secondary legislation once the essential identifying features are set out in statute. We intend to legislate when legislation is ready and when parliamentary time allows, given the pressing issues standing before our new cabinet. It is appropriate that with a new cabinet in place, the government takes care to reassess its immediate priorities. I can assure the House that the Secretary of State for Justice is exploring every legislative option because free speech is a fundamental cornerstone of our democracy. I note that overseas jurisdictions have hastily introduced SLAPP legislation and have later had to rectify and unpick it. I must assure the House, though, that legislation is important. We continue to monitor alleged SLAPPs as they arise to inform our response and ensure the measures we introduce reflect the problem accurately. Stakeholder engagement is a vital part of our monitoring efforts. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will skip to the end of my speech because I took so many interventions, but I am clear to the House that we do intend to legislate on this once the legislation is correct and once parliamentary time allows for that to happen, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is perhaps, as an adjournment debate, is unfortunately too short to properly discuss all the issues involved, but I hope I've reassured the House to that length.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Let me say aye. Aye. Thank you. No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.